Welcome to the Synthetic Media Podcast. I'm your host, Henrik de Cure. Join me for interviews and thoughts on the ever-expanding topic of synthetic media. You can find my book on synthetic media on Amazon. Subscribe to this podcast for free. Follow us on syntheticmediapodcast.com and enjoy today's episode.
I'm Andy Parsons. I'm the director of the Content Authenticity Initiative at Adobe. Adobe, of course, well known for making tools for creative professionals, document signing and generation. And the Content Authenticity Initiative, which we'll talk about today, is what I run at Adobe. My background before Adobe was in entrepreneurship, been chief technology officer and founder several times over, always in companies and initiatives focused on empowering creative professionals.
Andy, how are you involved with synthetic media?
So my role at Adobe is running the Content Authenticity Initiative, and we focus on 5 big areas, all of them associated one way or another with synthetic media. So I'll start off by saying, first of all, of course, Adobe makes extremely powerful, often AI-powered tools in all sorts of media. Photoshop, the verb Photoshop being effectively synonymous with altering media for malicious and creative purposes. But that also extends to video with Premiere and After Effects and many other products in the Creative Cloud and the Document Cloud suite of products. So in 2019, Adobe announced the Content Authenticity Initiative. And the idea was, instead of detecting what is fake, which we'll talk about more, can we prove ground truth about how something was made and make that cryptographically verifiable in a way that downstream validators or eventually consumers can see with full transparency what they're looking at, whether AI tools were used for good, for bad, for malicious, deceptive purposes, to kind of lay bare all the details about what was made. So we work in 5 areas in pursuit of that. Number one, and perhaps the most important long-term, is my team works on standards. And we do that under the auspices of the Linux Foundation. Linux Foundation, of course, being a well-known entity, nonprofit, that puts out open projects, open source, open standards into the world for ratification and adoption by international standards organizations. So we do that as Adobe, but we do it in concert collaboration with companies like Microsoft, ARM, Intel, BBC, New York Times, Twitter, and many others. And that is basically putting out into the world a standard way of creating this data about how something came to be, what it is, who contributed to it, and making sure that that can be embedded or associated with all kinds of media, streaming video, audio, and of course, still images. The second thing we do is we build these ideas and these concepts into the Adobe tools, of course, starting with Photoshop, which has been in private beta for about a year now, and we have some interesting, exciting announcements coming up about the idea of provenance, which is kind of the overarching term for what we do in terms of ground truth. We also, number 3, we work with many partnerships to bring these ideas to life. So these partnerships are with companies who produce synthetic media, companies who produce cameras, mobile devices, publishers, human rights defenders, all again in service of this idea of engendering provenance on the internet, mobile devices, et cetera. The 4th area we work in is community. So the Content Authenticity Initiative is an Adobe run and sponsored initiative, but it has 350 members, and those range from startup companies to what might be considered big tech companies, again, publishers, human rights defenders, academics, individual photojournalists and video journalists. And that community is all about understanding the implications of the coming onslaught of synthetic media and potentially deep fake, deceptive media. And also to put forth sort of other initiatives in service of building this idea of provenance and truth. And the last one is education. So we know that understanding synthetic media, what it means, how it's made, how it can be used for good and for malicious purposes, and understanding what ground truth for a piece of media actually means is all of the technical work won't mean a heck of a lot if people don't understand what they're seeing. And sometimes we liken this using a metaphor of the browser lock icon, which represents a secure channel between your browser on your desktop or your phone and the recipient of sensitive information like credit card information or social security information. And over time, we want to see this idea of ground truth about how media was made so that people can judge for themselves whether or not to trust it. is something that we want to see as ubiquitous and well adopted as that browser lock icon. So those are all the areas we work in. Specifically, my involvement with synthetic media is around understanding the kind of geopolitical and sociological implications that it is beginning to present, and will certainly present in much greater ratio in the coming years. And frankly, at the end of the day, what we can do in the area of provenance, again, understanding what something is rather than detecting whether it's fake or not, in order to provide transparency for consumers who surely in the next 5 to 10 years will see a tremendous percentage of the media that we encounter every day have at least one or two synthetic elements, if not be completely synthetically generated.
Andy, what are the biggest challenges and successes you've seen with synthetic media?
So I'll start with successes. I think it's often the case that, especially when we use terms like synthetic content or deep fakes, the connotation often is that this is bad, that this is about simulating the voice of a CEO of a publicly traded company in order to manipulate the stock price, or to maliciously modify news footage or news photography. But there are many, many extremely creative and positive uses, even businesses being built up around synthetic media. A good example is a company that's a member of the Content Authenticity Initiative called Synthesia. So some of your listeners may have seen the now pretty well-known public service announcement about malaria that was, ostensibly David Beckham, well-known celebrity, speaking in over a dozen languages. Now, David Beckham doesn't speak a dozen languages, but using the technology from this company, Synthesia, they were able to produce a synthetic David Beckham with lips and voice that were made using AI and machine learning for a very positive purpose. This company and many others do extraordinary work in education, helping build a more personalized experience for brands to build a personalized experience using synthetic avatars and such. The key for that to work and for those businesses to thrive is ensuring that these tools, which are very powerful, are used ethically and for good purposes. And part of the idea we have around content authenticity is to make sure that's possible, to say, Synthesia tools were used or XYZ tools were used, and here's why they were used. And that's very different from the kind of deep fake connotation I mentioned at first, which is, a bad actor may take a piece of entirely reliable news footage, change it in a way using synthetic media to make someone say or do something that they did not say or would never say. So I think the positive pieces are this idea of synthetic media and AI generated people, places, things. It just opens up a huge world of creativity. So things that were kind of relegated to the realm of Hollywood special effects studios just a few years ago to the tune of millions of dollars of budget are now democratized to the point that they certainly exist in the Adobe Creative Cloud, which I know well and work on every day, but also, handheld mobile tools like TikTok and Snapchat and kind of filters. I have a teenage daughter who uses these things every day, and they're just commonplace. Changing the way you look, changing your background, changing things in the scene, adding brands, these are just commonplace. It doesn't matter to her or users of those things that, they basically tax the supercomputer you have in your pocket, which is your mobile phone, and have some built-in AI. But those techniques are extremely sophisticated, and used responsibly, they can open up entire new worlds of creativity for, in video, for filmmaking, again, for educational purposes, on and on and on. The problem, of course, comes with the democratization of those tools. The darker side of that is if they're readily available, it becomes easier and easier for bad actors to use them in malicious, negative ways. And that's where I think provenance plays a very important role. So over time, when these ideas become ubiquitous and you can roll over something on Twitter that says, hey, this contains authenticity data, should you wish to understand what it is, where it came from, and frankly, whether AI tools were used, whether a person is synthetic, whether a police car has been removed, what have you, that data should be expected and understood. And again, hence the education piece of it. So I think, there are very interesting implications coming. This is just the early days. A lot of people say to me, well, we haven't really seen the onslaught of synthetic media or deep fakes, and governments aren't falling because of deep fakes and deceptive media. And my answer is twofold to that. One is maybe not, but we have to imagine that this is coming and that we need to understand ethical implications and provide tools for people creating these things if they want to be good actors in the ecosystem. And the second piece of the answer is, given the sophistication of the tools in AI generated media, how would we know? Like, would we even know? And certainly within 5 years, 10 years, it will be unknowable with the naked eye or the naked ear whether something has been synthetically generated, because these tools are becoming sophisticated at such a rate that, ultimately detecting using adversarial AI that can tell whether AI was used to produce something, those techniques in the long run will fail. And I think we'll be left with this idea of provenance, kind of an old concept from the art world, that if you know what something is, who made it, where that's appropriate, who the photographer was, who published it, those are the trust signals that we will come to rely on.
Andy, what advice would you like to share with people working on synthetic media?
Keep going, number one. Again, I really look at the positive side of synthetic media generation, all of the great creative uses. Certainly that's what we're doing at Adobe. And at the end of the day, for creative professionals, using AI help in the processes they undertake, and using AI generated media can help them, reach new creative heights. So we want to encourage that. My advice is to continue doing what you're doing, but always think about the ethical implications of what you're doing. And if tools to explain, and what I like to say is show your work, are available to you, and in the coming years, if we are successful in the Content Authenticity Initiative, they will be widely available. Use those tools. If you're a good actor in the ecosystem, tell people what you're doing, show your work, be proud of the tools you're using, and make sure that it's known that this was done for a specific reason. If something is satire, express that it's intended to be satirical. If you used an AI tool to put a politician in a video for satirical reasons, say that out loud, and make it clear to your viewers and fact checkers and others downstream what this is, what it was intended to do. Second, I would say anybody who's involved in the ecosystem should also share some of the responsibility around educating their consumers around what synthetic media is. Again, there's this sort of black cloud over the word deep fakes, that these are going to be used to deceive consumers, to deceive politicians, to deceive governments. And while that may be true, I think it's equally important to make sure that folks know that deep fakes, if you will, can be good, and synthetic media can be extremely positive. And whether we like it or not, this is here. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle. And therefore, we have to educate ourselves, each other, and ultimately consumers in a sort of media literacy ecosystem that synthetic media is here to stay, and it can be used for extremely positive purposes. And when you come to understand that you should expect to be able to interrogate something for what it is, then, if you see something in your newsfeed on social media that doesn't have an expression of what it is, what the intent was, cryptographically certifiable data about its provenance, you might look at it with an eye of skepticism. Just like if you saw something published by a well-known publisher who you trust, and you knew that that particular piece of media used AI, and it purported to be news, you might look at that with a sort of eye of skepticism. So I think we have to have our eyes open going into the near future, the next few years, but also fully understand that synthetic media can be used for good, and those producing it, I think, share in the responsibility of educating their audiences and consumers in general of what this is, how these tools are able to be used for good, and to also conjure a generation of skeptics in our children and their children, so that they understand what they're looking at and why it is the way it is.
Andy, where can we learn more about synthetic media and your work on this subject?
Well, I would direct the audience to contentauthenticity.org, which is the home of the Content Authenticity Initiatives. There you'll see some examples of the work we do around this idea of provenance I described. You'll see some examples of hardware devices that capture data about how something was made. Those are then brought into Photoshop or a tool like it, and this is all demonstrated, potentially published on the New York Times website, shared on Twitter. You'll see that this data about what something is, how it was made, whether synthetic tools were used, is all preserved through that pipeline all the way to sharing on social media. But we also sponsor a bunch of events and hold events for the community, and often they focus specifically on synthetic media. So I would urge anybody who's interested in the topic and this particular approach to truth and trust, if you will, to join the initiative, to read about it online, and kind of to follow the work we're doing. So that's where I would start. I'm biased because I think this is kind of a critical piece to restore a level of trust on the internet. But I would ask your listeners to start at contentauthenticity.org.
Join us next week for a new episode by subscribing to the Synthetic Media Podcast. Check out my book about synthetic media on Amazon. Follow us on syntheticmediapodcast.com. This podcast was produced by Henrik de Gior. Music by Mattia Capelli. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. And thank you for listening.